Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, it's very scary now that we are past Sports Pro London. That means we're officially into the month of May, which is ridiculous how fast this year has gone so far. But one of the things, Nick, that I see at the start of every May is May 4th. May the 4th be with you. And every professional sports team puts out some sort of Star Wars themed post of people with lightsabers or different funny outfits. And Nick, were you a Star Wars person growing up?
I wasn't a massive fan, but I watched them all for sure.
Yeah.
But I wasn't I wasn't a proper Star Wars nerd. I don't think my wife has seen any of them actually, which I found a bit of a revelation. Yeah, to not see any of them. But no, I wouldn't say I was a nerd, but I watched the first three multiple times. I remember pretty vividly seeing. Well, they're like isn't a prequel? So the first three are in the middle, and then there's the next three were a prequel, and then
So if you go by release date versus where they fit within the story,
release date,
the original three, yes, are in the middle of the story.
Yeah. So I've seen those in multiple times. I think I've only seen the second three that were released once, and then after that, then I think I've seen all the others. So, but yeah, it's a long time between drinks for those things, so it is a bit hard to get your head around the storylines. Like I think when you're watching those things, it's like what trying to piece all those things together. Obviously, Star Wars nerds just live off that stuff, but it's a bit of a messes with the head a little bit.
Yeah, I remember, and this is where it's going to feel really, really old school, Nick. I remember going to my aunt's house, and she had them on VHS. I used to burn through those things on VHS, but I'm similar to you. I wouldn't describe myself as an all-out Star Wars person. I went and saw, because the original trilogy came out before I was born. Also why I was on VHS. I don't think any of the other ones ever would have been on VHS. I don't even know if the newest trilogy ever even saw a physical copy. You probably could buy a physical copy for like collectors.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't even know if the new stuff would. Surely there's like collector DVD box sets, but like in terms of mass distribution.
Do people produce DVDs anymore? I have no idea. That's having a massive revelation now.
You say that, but like vinyls are making a really big comeback with music.
True.
So like,
is it and like Blu-rays and DVDs? I mean, I work in media. I have no idea if any of those are a thing these days. I've got some just in the corner over there, which I don't know if even they can. I have a device that they work on. I think my old PlayStation in the box.
I think PlayStation does,
have it open for 10 years, plays DVDs, and that was like really cool back then. That was yeah.
I'm sure there'll be collector's boxes. Like I said,
Must be.
Surely you would think so. Like, I mean, all that stuff's coming back, like Pokemon cards right now. Like I keep seeing jokes about how like Pokemon cards are a better investment than the S&P. I saw things like you bought a piece of cardboard with a dragon on it and it's worth more and you've done nothing. Yep.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, actually. I don't know how I ended up getting into it. I was quite young. I was collecting basketball cards, NBA basketball cards. And I think it was the 93-94 season. And I collected all 553 Upper Deck full season cards. I don't know how I could afford it. I think I was kind of like, that was like my walking around the streets between where my mum was working and to this what do you call it, like toy store where they were selling them. Yeah. I must have blown so much money in trades on that. But I ended up with a full set, and I thought by now, 30 odd years later, they'd be worth a fortune. They're one of the few basketball sets that have not gone up in value basically in 30 years because I think they were so popular back then that there's just sets everywhere. So I'm sitting on some cards. There's a few that are worth something, but nothing that to write home about, sadly.
Yeah, well, not to get too off piece. This is why I'm not completely dismissing NFTs yet, Nick. Like, people like collecting stuff. I just don't think that the model's been quite right or the value proposition.
Sure.
Like, I'm still on So Rare. Like, it's not quite what it was, but it's still they claim they're making money. That's why I'm not completely dead on NFTs. I think there's still something there if someone can get the model right.
Yeah, the problem is everyone launches a collectible of something, digital collectible. Well, they're not that rare, I guess. Ultimately, I have been getting served lots of that stuff when I go into YouTube and even on Netflix the other day. There was like this stuff on collectibles and Pokemon cards and movie, all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, it still seems to be really big business. but most of it is all in physical form, not
It is.
in the
It is.
digital version. So I just saw someone doing a whole bunch of like obsessed with Michael Jordan and all these cards. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I've got about half a dozen Michael Jordan
Yeah.
cards sitting in a box somewhere on the eastern coast of Australia, which
Yeah.
is may or may not be worth something. I'm not even
Yeah.
sure. I've sort of given up on the value of that for now. We'll see.
Well, next time you go home, you can have a dig out. You can have a check of that, Nick, just to see maybe, because my mom was clearing out all my stuff back at home, and there's a collection of Pokemon cards, and she's like, "Can I get rid of these?" And I was like, "Just, I'm coming home in a couple months. Let me just see what's in there because there just might be something."
Well, the ridiculous thing is to get. I know we need to get back on track here. Is that the ridiculous thing is that those cards, some of them are worth nothing,
Yeah.
and then the next card over could be worth a load of money just because it's got the right person. It's just a weird dynamic. I'm not really comfortable with the fact that one card's worth nothing and this one's worth loads, but it's actually the frequency at the time was exactly the same. It's just the novelty value of a famous person. But hey, that's the world we live in now anyway.
Yeah.
So maybe I should be so surprised.
Maybe. Well, talking on to business, Nick, one of the things you and I did when we were at Sports Pro London, we recorded a few different interviews, things that we're hoping to bring to the people that weren't able to attend the event because they are worthwhile insights that should exist beyond the event. And you had the opportunity to sit down with Peter Bellamy, who's the Chief Revenue Officer at Deltatre. Obviously, Deltatre are a leader in the space. They work with a number of really impressive clients, but it's also a space that is seeing a lot of change, Nick. We maybe covered on a future episode. ViewLift would have possibly considered a rival or a competitor to someone like Deltatre, just got acquired by DAZN. And we've seen these sorts of acquisitions, these types of moves. You start looking at the sport radars and the geniuses of the world, some of the things that they're doing in this space. It is a rapidly evolving space all the time, Nick. So, having that opportunity to sit down with someone like Peter at a place like Deltatre, and they've got some changes going on internally, new products, things like that they're launching. It is a space that seems to be moving quite a lot, Nick.
Well, yeah, and for those that have followed Deltatrade's journey, there they were acquired by Bruin Capital, sold by Bruin Capital to Bain Capital, and now they've gone through a huge transformation, disruption, whatever you want to call it, over the last few years since that acquisition. The previous CEOs now stepped down. A new CEO stepped into a role there, Marc Watson, who is of BT Sport and DAZN. And 11 Sports fame, I suppose you would call it, from the industry. And he stepped into that role. So I'd say it feels like quite a major dynamic shift in the business. Someone that, Andrea Marini, who was the CEO, wasn't as publicly in the public eye, I suppose you call it. I expect Marc, who's been more of a front man in the respective businesses he has been, to perhaps be a bit more visible and out there, and whether that's going to have an impact positively on the brand, because I think people were a little bit uncertain what the future looked like for Deltatre recently. All the whilst they have been bringing in some really strong clients and seem to have some really strong long-standing relationships in place that I think most vendors in this space will be very, very jealous of. So it's just an interesting time to look at Deltatre. And I didn't get to talk too much on the business strategy with Pete, but I did talk to him a little bit about how they're going to market and selling themselves and promoting themselves at the moment, given the changing dynamic of the sports media landscape. And just basically how they've been evolving their offering from what it was several years ago. So definitely good to, when you want to hear how someone's going to market, talk to the guys leading their sales and revenue strategy. That's normally a good place to start.
Yeah, and I think the challenge as well, because I have had opportunities to engage with Deltatre, and I think they understand the market space. There's only so many of what you call the tier ones, the really big properties, the ones everybody wants to get. But then there's all those other properties underneath that we've covered in our different episodes, from all different types of tier twos, tier threes, that still need to be able to come up with these solutions and figuring out where their place is. And I think Deltatre as well has talked about having to balance out that, as you say, approach to market, making sure that they have something that can be accessible for everybody, but still also kind of is the high quality that's associated with Deltatre.
Well, that's an important part of their evolution. I mean, a few years ago, they were largely considered, one of the major players, but really something that only the bigger names might be working with. And now they have added a lot of different products to try and suit and serve the rest of the ecosystem and not just sports alone. And actually, they have a number of non-sports clients now and doing some pretty impressive work on. So they've definitely widened the scope of the business. But there's no doubt that the market is very, very tricky now. So how does someone like them who is sitting at the top echelon continue to deliver the growth that is expected of them when you receive all that sort of investment behind them? But they seem to have really fleshed out almost like productifying their business more effectively to be able to go to market on those types of things. And couple that with the fact that they acquired Endeavour Streaming recently as well. There's that whole journey they're going through of bringing all the clients of Endeavour Streaming into the Deltatre ecosystem, which we cover a little bit in the conversation I had with Pete.
And basically, the last question I'll ask you, and maybe you and Peter touched on it a little bit, is this idea. It's very similar to what we did with the OTT Summit. We renamed it the Media Summit because we recognize that OTT is simply just one vertical. And I think there's probably a time Deltatre would have been associated specifically with the streaming aspect. But we talk about now, those digital ecosystems are so much broader. It doesn't just sit just with streaming, and whether that's a reflection of the overall industry, sort of where you see these types of businesses and how they fit in, given the fact that streaming is just one vertical, and perhaps you can specialize in it, but you might be limiting what you can do given all the other needs that you need at this point.
Yeah, I think one of the things they perhaps have faced is a bit of a misunderstanding of who they are as a business. I don't know what I would have, if you had asked me that. I actually think the way Pete talks about it, you'll learn a bit more about it, is kind of the way I have already seen this business. The difference is that they've really focused the last few years on that more considered focus on the lower tier sports properties as well as the top tier. So they're working with streamers, some major streaming platforms. They're working with some major sports partners, but they're also offering dedicated products that are easy to use, easy to get up and running, much quicker than I think historically they would have been seen as being able to do. So they've been listening to the market and clearly improved some of those aspects. Recent announcements that they launched a new platform with DFB out of Germany. That's something I'm not sure we cover in this conversation, but we've got some recent coverage because they got up and running in only a matter of a couple of months, which is in this day and age is what's expected or what's needed, because most people don't like to make decisions with years in planning. Unfortunately, I think that's something that most platform suppliers like Deltatre would love to have a little bit more of a runway on, but they've evolved their product and it's certainly better positioned for the market than it was today. So yeah, we talk a bit about all those types of things on this with Pete, which hopefully will be insightful for those that are interested in how Deltatre is evolving.
All right. Well, we will hand things over to that interview, and we won't see you on this other side. So I'll thank you for joining for this episode, and I hope you enjoy the interview with Nick and Pete.
So Peter, you've been at Deltatre for about 18 months now, I think, if my maths is correct.
Yep, spot on.
How have you found the journey so far?
Great. I mean, hard work, exciting. Like we were talking before off camera, so much of the market is dynamic in a good way and a bad way. Businesses are struggling. Some are really looking to accelerate. So it's exciting to be in. And we work across the media and broadcast and sports sector with digital and OTT and data and graphics. So the surface area is quite wide. So never a dull day for sure.
Now, you've joined at a time where there's a lot of change also happening with, obviously, Marc Watson's joining as the CEO. Market's also changing along with it as well. Just how have you found the ability to come straight in and get straight into, obviously, the commercial side, which you'll focus on, versus also balancing that change process that's also happening?
Yeah, of course. I've known Marc personally for about 10, 15 years now, because there's a bit of crossover when BT Sport were a client of mine when we were running all the box office services for them. But also for a good 3-4 years when he was at 11 Sports. And again, when I was at New Line, we were running all of the direct-to-consumer OTT services. So, we've known each other for a while, which is great. So there's familiarity from that point of view. Look, I'd say he's incredibly well connected, working at BT and 11 and DAZN more recently. He's had access to amazing engagements with all the big sports properties, leagues, etc. So I think his understanding of the media rights market, and then more recently with direct consumer with 11 and DAZN especially being more focused on streaming, I think has been fantastic. So we're picking up a lot there immediately. And then I think, to your point, like any kind of relatively wide, complex technology business, which ultimately we are, technology product business, there's a lot to get your head around, So I think he's going through that journey at the minute. I think he's on week 7 at the minute. So, but no, all good so far. It's been good fun.
Your previous employees in Endeavour Streaming are now part of the Deltatre business and ecosystem. How have you found that transition, bringing in the technology, bringing in the people, and all that comes with bringing in another business of that scale?
Yeah, well, look, I left Endeavour Streaming in summer of 24, and then it was springtime of last year, 25, that we realised there's an opportunity to acquire them, which was very exciting. I always thought the Vespa platform, which is the underlying OTT platform, was incredibly powerful. But really, one of the reasons why I decided to move across to Deltatre independently of that was I just felt that to really maximise the opportunity in the market, especially with sports properties, you had to be able to deliver that digital capability. And Deltatre had that. They had that with Forge. And so I kind of made that move ahead of time. But then really when Endeavour Streaming became an opportunity, it was like, wow, we can really supercharge this. So again, as we were talking previously before, it's quite complementary. So we have our Vespa platform, which has come across from Endeavour Streaming, very much kind of end-to-end, highly productized platform, a great fit for sports leagues, teams, etc. And then Deltatre, I would say the pedigree there is more lean towards big broadcast, big media deployments with the Access platform. So actually the Access platform's modular, we act as the big system integrator, and we power those services for the likes of Rogers and Bell and BritBox BBC. So actually, we don't really need to go through any big complex integration. We feel like we can attack the market across both of those. And I'll come back to the kind of digital OTT combo maybe later in the conversation.
So when you're talking to the market, talking to people across the industry, in my view, I've seen Deltatre evolve a lot over the years. How do you describe the business now? What is it offering? How does it fit in the landscape today?
So I think I can give you a very quick run through maybe product sets just to set the scene. So as I say, we have our Vespa platform, which is that end-to-end OTT-centric solution. We then have our Access capability, which we've had for 15, 20 years within Deltatre, powering those big broadcast services. We then have Forge, which is our digital publishing platform. I think at the last count we have over 300 properties there. We run 4 of the 5 major US sports leagues on that. So that is your kind of multifunctional news, editorial, ticketing, gamification, etc. All powered by Forge. Again, we act as that kind of system integrator to bring in those third parties to deliver that .com experience that you see with NHL.com, and obviously how that flows through to the application experience. And then we have a data and graphics division as well, which has actually got the longest pedigree going back 40 years, so the company at its 40th birthday, going back to very, very early deployments of data and graphics for World Athletics and various others. So, that's really the surface area, and then we have our kind of strategy and growth services teams that we wrap around those product deployments to hopefully try and give as much value for those clients and how to actually grow and hit their KPIs. So that's it's quite a wide surface area, and we have increasingly more and more clients opting to take more of those product sets for operational benefits, and that that's a key strategic focus for us, is to try and do as much as we can across that client base.
Why do you think that is, that they're going down the more product-specific approach? Is it because they're now more mature and they know what they need? Is it because they have already a matured set of products and are looking to rewrite it all and start from scratch rather than just improve and enhance? What's the dynamic there? Because historically, I've thought of Deltatre especially as someone that would partner them with a rights owner or a broadcaster on quite a holistic scale, and then Deltatre gets to work. But it sounds like you've adjusted that, or to have more flex in that approach.
You know what? It really depends where you're coming from. So I think if you look at big media, broadcast, telco businesses, we are very confident that we will continue to build that vertical, because I think a lot of them are struggling to continue to build and innovate the pace they want to. They quite often will have very large engineering groups. They're potentially going through this big transition from the DTH subscriber model to, direct to consumer. They've got the big streamers to compete with. So we're going to continue to do a lot there with our Access product in kind of taking the complexity out of their business, providing cost savings, and then really allowing them to focus on some very specific areas around, consumer engagement, CRM, and ultimately how they go and have the best kind of content portfolio. So I think that's one market kind of vertical that we look at. And then I think when it comes to more of the sports market, the leagues, the teams, sports properties, it's all about how do you centralise the fan data. So actually we're in the process of, and we will be announcing more widely, we're launching a new product called Nexus, which is actually a combination of our Vesper OTT platform solution and Forge from a digital publishing point of view. We feel very strongly that we're really the only provider in the market that can go to these sports leagues or teams or whoever it may be, and instead of them needing one agency to do their content publishing system and an agency to be building out their front-end experiences for all of the normal engagement that you get around news and editorial, etc., and then having to have another OTT provider to build something on an island over there, we're bringing all of that together. So it kind of, we look at it from the point of view of what's the business impact? How can we deliver contractual efficiencies, operational efficiencies, cost efficiencies, but in bringing it together, then how do we deliver like the consumer-facing impact, right? Which is that I don't go off to a separate OTT service which has a very poor, limited link from the core digital service. How do you actually bring that all together and you centralise it within a kind of a single sign-on solution? That's really where we feel we can deliver an awful lot of value for these sports businesses, because we all know this, but if you're a football club or a league, the more you can understand your customer data and standardise it across all those touch points, the more you have insights on where the value is, where the problems are. So that's really the big focus for us.
One of the things that stands out for me when I ever talk to someone launching a new platform is the difficulty of transitioning from the old to the new. I also noticed that you guys have helped launch, was it DFB launch a platform just in a couple of months, I think was the headline there. Just how are you finding the ability to do that these days? Has it improved? Has it always been something that you think Deltatre especially has been able to do well? Or is it, whether it's new technologies or ways of working that's helping that happen more quickly, about basically getting up and running faster?
I'd say it's a mixed bag. It depends on who you're kind of migrating away from. Yeah. So there can sometimes be challenges there. But I would say overall it's becoming a little bit easier. I think there's more standardisation in authentication systems that are maybe used out there, so you can migrate people more easily. You can migrate entitlements, so what they've bought, what they have access to. There's a bit more simplicity there. And look, I think in general for us as a business and for others in the market, there are less and less probably greenfield opportunities, a lot of brownfield, right? So you've got to be moving. You've got to have a very clear process of bringing things across, giving it the upgrade and taking it to market without impacting the consumer. So we have a pretty good repeatable model there, I'd say.
How are you now approaching the way you do these types of arrangements and relationships with partners? It seems to be, from what I see, getting more and more complex to agree terms of what's required or what's required by any of the rights holders you might be working with, or even broadcasters. How does that look now? Is it still very straightforward in terms of deal making? Is it quite complex with revenue projections as part of the deals? How are you just finding that dynamic now?
Again, it can really differ from one opportunity to another. We have lots of very standard kind of services-based contracts, so there's some form of kind of initial investment through CapEx and then OpEx and a load of variable fees on just the amount of throughput that's coming into the platform, from content processing to viewership, how long people are watching that content for. We then have others that are a little bit more skewed towards a kind of shared risk, shared reward kind of revenue share structure. But I think ultimately, maybe to answer your question a little bit more directly, we're doing an awful lot now in the initial engagement with our prospective clients, right, where we look at what is their rights portfolio or their content portfolio, which markets they're looking to go into, what's the total addressable audience, what's the propensity to pay, and really looking at all of that and actually helping them understand what the level of investment is, and then maybe what the returns are over 5 years. And then, as I say, increasingly we have kind of a very OTT-centric growth services function where we really act as an extension of our clients' digital growth team, where we're advising them on how to spend their marketing dollars. Again, what's working, what isn't working from a content strategy point of view. So we're increasingly, not just providing the product and the operational support, but more of the kind of strategic insight as well.
You touched on data a little bit there in terms of fan data. Just talk me through how you're seeing and what the benefits are of, I guess, having a centralized view on those fans, and how easy is that to actually turn into something of tangible value for the customer?
So great question. I think it's important to say that we're not trying to suggest that we can go into a sports league or team and control absolutely everything for them as a full outsource. That we need to be realistic. We're not a ticketing platform. We have gamification partners, etc. So I think when it comes to fan data, what is the kind of the North Star that we're trying to support our clients on is really, how do you start to build profiles of fans, right? So if you take a league or a team, they really want to understand across their engaged fan base, where are they coming in from? What sort of content are they engaging with? Are they never attending games because they're in a different country, but consume a hell of a lot of video, but maybe only buy a little bit of merchandise from the store, but are not part of the fantasy product? We as a platform partner, we need to be able to identify these trends and ultimately plug into our clients' centralized data lake so they can start to build these profiles. Because, if you take a football club, for example, they want to know that, maybe I'm local, I go to a lot of games, but I'm not really engaging in anything else. So therefore, I should be receiving offers to 25% off the stadium shop. I should be receiving offers to a 15% discount to some premium video offerings, etc.
So you're plugging into directly into their CMSs, basically allow them to control that.
You allow that, and then ultimately you then look at someone like yourself who might be in another country, and actually the engagement model needs to be completely different. So really trying to build that profile, and as I say, ensuring that we can provide amazing insights on the digital and the OTT experience, but there are other things that these sports properties teams want to do themselves. So we need to make sure we provide all that data in a way they can utilise it themselves as well.
There's a lot of uncertainty, I think, still in the market of how to approach a sports media strategy and what products to create and what not to, and distributing on social and big tech platforms versus selling in rights to whoever will take them at any price to get the visibility. How do you see that landscape right now? Do you think it needs to be a multifaceted approach? Do you think there's value in really doubling down on having your own destination and leading into that solely? What's your kind of view on what you're seeing?
I think it can differ massively, but I think the one constant is I don't think there really should be any sports property league team that doesn't have the ability to be engaging with their fans directly in some form or another. You absolutely need to have a robust digital offering. You really should be capturing customer data centrally. You should be trialing new content formats to that customer base so that you can build up a view of what's working, what isn't working. And then really from our perspective, we also need to be dynamic. Very often we will deliver really good outcomes in certain markets where they decide to go premium direct to consumer, and then actually that triggers a better negotiation of sports rights in that market, and we maybe dial that market down and we come out a little bit, and then we go into another market, etc. So we need to be able to adapt with what they're doing. That's a really crucial part for us. And then also we need to make sure that the services that we deliver, we can increasingly aggregate them out, on platform, off platform, into third party distribution platforms as well. We have to be able to cater for all of that.
Historically, I would say that, you might correct me if I'm wrong here, but Deltatre has been seen as a company that the big players would work with because of the comprehensive nature of what you've offered, and you've worked with some of the biggest brands and rights holders in the space. Where are you today on that front? It feels like you have tried to diversify that approach actively with new products and solutions, some of that you've talked about today. can you give us a sense of what some of those range or perhaps breadth of clients to give people perspective on who you work with today?
Yeah, so at the high end of kind of scale, growth and revenue would be the big media and entertainment companies, like, as I say, Rogers, Bell, BBC, MediaCorp. We then have a lot of kind of top tier sports leagues like UEFA and Serie A and various others, where we do an awful lot of deployments for them. As I say, not just OTT and digital, but also data and graphics and officiating and VAR and a really wide breadth. But especially in the acquisition of Endeavour Streaming with Vespa, and I talked about Vespa and Axis, catering for different parts of the market, you really can see our client base is very diversified now. So we have we have football clubs that are not even in the top league in their domestic market, all the way through to we have some of the smaller regional sports leagues to standalone sports properties, all the way up to those larger kind of top 10 sports property leagues doing various things. So we feel there are areas that we maybe don't want to go into that are too low, but we feel that our product sets can cater for a large portion of the different areas of the market.
And typically, what's the difference in what they're asking from you? Typically, for say a lower tier challenger sports property club, whatever you want to call them, how different is it what they want? Obviously, the scale or breadth is different, but are they asking the same things of you?
No, very different. I would say that we increasingly are trying to be as consultative as we can be in the overall strategy for some of those smaller sports properties. Again, I think we all know this, that although there's a huge amount of money in sport, actually when you look at, for example, the individual teams, they generally run with pretty small teams. So they are investing in digital expertise, etc. But we feel that we can add a lot of value in an overall kind of strategic partnership. But then you look at some of the big broadcast telco deployments. It's more about arguably just real quality of products, very good stability, because they're businesses that have been run for the last 30 years, 40 years on mining their customer data, building their profiles, etc., where maybe actually we don't add as much value. So it can be a very different kind of partnership framework, I suppose, depending on who it is.
So you're obviously offering a lot. You're working with a lot of different companies. At the same time, what I hear across the industry is there's a lot of competition, a lot of different vendors offering different things. And now that you've brought Endeavour into, which I would say historically I would have thought Endeavour and Deltatre were definitely the top two leaders on the sports-specific front. How are you seeing the competitive landscape now from Deltatre's point of view?
So I think there's obviously has been consolidation. We've bought Endeavour Streaming in, and there have been a few other examples there. I would say that we see different types of competition by region, but I would say on a global level we don't really see that there's that much direct comparison. I think we very humbly see ourselves as the biggest digital OTT kind of provider in our space. So as I say, we generally see those regional trends, different competition in the US market. US market is different. You've got the regional sports networks. The makeup is different. How fans engage with content, and then again, you look at EMEA, you look at APAC, different forms of competition, I would say.
And final question, really, on basically taking a step back and looking across the industry. Just what are you seeing generally that the biggest challenge that is facing your clients today? Is it visibility? Is it monetization? Is it something else that I wouldn't know, but you're hearing in different conversations?
Good question. I would say if you look at the broadcast telco space, it's all about that transition strategy. How do they stabilize the DTH subscriber base? How do they keep them happy? How do they try and move them across into a different experience? How much of it do they want to proactively move them across rather than maybe just keep them happy over there? So there's a lot of complexity, and they have huge operational complexity. So really our focus there is helping them solve on that. So that's very different. And then I think if you look more on the sports space, it's about that balance, and again, it's very different from one property to another. That balance of maximising the domestic rights value for a lot of our partners. What you would class as the secondary rights market for them is much more challenged than it used to be. So you really got to help them and find new models for them to go into that, because I think generally most sports properties and leagues, right, would have the domestic market number one by a country mile. They'd then maybe have 5 to maybe 10 maximum secondary markets where they could still hoover up a lot of revenue from a media perspective, and then media rights perspective, and then probably tier 3 onwards. I think that tier 2 space is very interesting for us, and we just, as I say, need to be supportive in helping them deploy very quickly, because that's the other thing is, none of us like to talk about the fact that maybe there are issues and you need to move fast, but excuse me, but we absolutely need to support that, because as you know, a lot of these negotiations go to the 11th hour, and then occasionally you do need to call their bluff and say, right, we are going to switch on in your market, and off we go. So that would be a challenge for them, and then not to bang on about the same thing, but I think in the sports market, really trying to unify your fan data or customer data, if you can achieve that, and there's so much more to do, I think that's very exciting. And then also a bugbear of mine is ticketing. I think ticketing is pretty disastrous at the minute in most countries, right, as to how you go and buy tickets to live events. Like, if there can be a solve for that, if some of these big leagues can re-centralise that, I think that would be for the greater good. But I appreciate it kind of breaks the overarching economic model currently.
Why not? Just break and disrupt the whole industry model. Why not? But it makes a lot of sense. I don't think it is a very clunky way, particularly from a fan experience perspective. There's no way that the ways are working now makes any sense.
No, it's tough, and we all buy tickets to sports events, and I'm always quite kind of blown away by how tricky it can be sometimes.
Well, Pete, it's been great to hear a bit more about what you've been up to and what's happening with Deltatre. Obviously, always like following Deltatre's journey, so look forward to seeing what's next.
No, thank you for your time. It's been great. Cheers.
Pete.